Welcome to the Canadian Superbike Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Canadian Superbike Podcast. Thank you for being with us as always. If you'd like to follow along on social media, I'm at TSN_Marsh. The man on the other side of the Zoom with me here is Colin Fraser. Although I see a Colin J. Fraser. It's a very official name on the Zoom naming there that you've thrown in, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, that is my middle initial. I'm not disguising anything, but I don't know why that's a J. It's from somewhere deep in the pandemic, probably.
It's okay. I for a long time on my CFL work, I had, when I switch off my camera, I had just a picture of Dwayne Ford. And because that was always kind of the running joke that it was like Dwayne was in the shot twice when we were doing our Zooms with the teams, which by the way, on Wednesday, July 2nd, I am doing today with Hamilton and Toronto. So if anybody wants to watch Argonauts Tiger Cats, and you can do that on Friday night as you guys are out in Rad Torque. I will be chipping away doing all of my football stuff. But you did have a chance to come down to BMO Field and enjoy the Argonauts experience, the chaos. Colin, what do you think? You rode the Beamer down and came to a football game.
Yeah, I hadn't been to an Argos game in a couple of years, and I do enjoy going. I used to go when I was a teenager. I was helping out with a place called Lyndhurst Lodge. I would push people in wheelchairs, and we would go and be on field level, which I learned quickly seems really cool, but you cannot tell anything about a football game from field level, particularly back in the 70s when there were no big cameras with big screens that would help you get an overview of things. Reminded me of when I played football and my coach would ask me after a play what I thought had happened, as if somehow in the middle of it I had an idea.
I was just about to say the same thing. I'm like, I played quarterback and you're supposed to be able to see everything on the field. And hearing you say, yeah, being field level is a terrible way to watch a game, I'm like, yep, because half the time I had no clue what was happening. Also, I used to always think, man, those coordinators who sit up in the booth, cowards. I'm like, get down there on the field. You got to be close to the action. And then you sit up high, as I do now broadcasting. I'm like, oh, this is why, because you can actually tell things that are happening. I guess that's why spotters, right, in motorsports are also very high up, because try doing a spotting job, calling out what's happening from being essentially track level. It's like, it's damn near impossible.
Well, I've been in the situation more so with automobile racing where I've been working in the tower, and particularly when in the States, if we're sharing with an endurance series or IndyCar or NASCAR, I've worked at those events, and you go up into the roof of the tower and you are there with the spotters. But the problem is you begin to have this notion that somehow there's control. And the best thing to do, particularly at an endurance race, is, you would go down and make sure everything went smoothly in post-race tech and the podium. And then you're back in the war zone, right? You're in the trenches and none of it makes sense. And no one has an overview and no one knows what's going on. And meanwhile, there's some guy in the tower yelling at you with the radio that this has to be fixed. And no one even knew it was broken.
Yeah, 100%. Just before we get into our Bridgestone Canadian Superbike Championship preview here of round number 3 going out to Edmonton this weekend, just because we're talking about spotters and history and having relevant points of context on different things, I'm going to throw you a curveball like I always do, because the communication that it's coming, that they are going to have dash communication or they're going to have radio communication. They've been testing these things in MotoGP and a couple of other different places. What is your take on how that is going to actually affect the quality of the racing, or I guess the texture of the racing? Because one of the things that I've come to appreciate the most since I've been around all of this is just the fact that guys read their pit board. Sometimes MotoGP, you get a little thing on the dash, whether it be a warning or this or that, but it's you on the bike. Like the second the visor goes down, it's you, bike, you're in control, and everything that happens after that is really up to you. And having the radio communication that they are discussing, to me, that feels like that's going to change the way that things feel and the way that a lot of things play out.
Well, I think it's like a lot of things. And in car racing, this plays out particularly with a simulator, that younger guys who played a lot of video games can spend more time in the simulator, and some older guys really struggle with it. Lewis Hamilton famously doesn't like the simulator and spends as little time in it as he can. Some guys are in it morning, noon, and night. So where I'm headed with this is some people are good with technology and immediately take on a new idea. Some people, you can explain what all the buttons do and the warning's going to come up on the dash. And mostly they only notice when there's a light flashing, as in can pay attention, right? So, first of all, they're getting in MotoGP, they're getting information on the dash right now. There is the facility to flash a light to warn them. Of course, the flashing lights, they're more concerned about that they're having a mechanical issue. But to turn this around, 20 years ago now, I ran an endurance series based out of Daytona Beach called Moto ST for twins. And actually, one of our top competitors was Ross Milson, who now runs the Canadian Superbike Championship, but he raced in that series. And we allowed radio communication. So pretty much everybody had a Motorola radio in the hump of their leathers with a wire that connected them, and they could talk to their teams. And, as with other forms of racing, some of the riders and teams were chatting nonstop. Some of them didn't like to talk. And, we've had several top riders, including, I think, Bagnaia for Ducati, saying that he really, really didn't like being bothered, didn't want to talk. And whether that can change or whether that's specific to the guy. And I mean, it's an interesting question because it's been a while now, but, football with the quarterback in connection to the coach. And that, of course, happened to try and speed things up, right? Less lengthy delays and less timeouts and everything. And that's where we are with MotoGP. We're running, flag to flag. We have a spare bike that's mandated by the rules and rain and all that kind of stuff. So they're just trying to speed up the show. And obviously, when you watch F1 coverage, everyone understands that hearing that communication between the team and the driver is paramount to understanding the race. And the giveaway is how the announcers stop talking when the clip comes up. So I'm sure from a Dorna perspective, they would love to have those audio clips to build into their race coverage. So there's a lot of things going on, and that's going to be the argument, right? Because people are going to sell it with the commission as being a safety factor, particularly if it's raining or something like that, or it's starting to spit. But someone else is going to say, hey, this is going to help us find sponsors. This is going to do a whole bunch of other different things. So it's never ever one thing. And safety, which is a word most people don't want to say out loud, gets bandied around a lot for things that actually have more to do with entertainment.
Yeah, and to that point, there's also been a lot of discussion. It seems like recently more than there has been, since I've been into this the last couple of years, about the idea of like it could change the feeling of things, and safety will play into this. However, will it actually make the racing better, and who will it help? Because it feels like for some guys it's just a distraction. Like I'm kind of interested in even like Maverick Vinales gets like the tire pressure warning that he ignored on his dash. I'm like, that seems like a guy who's going to get a radio message being like, hey Mav, do this, and he's just going to like shake his head no next time he goes past the pit board because he's like, no, I'm doing my own thing, leave me alone. But I think it will be really interesting to see how different personalities adapt to it, because even like the quote that Frankie Morbidelli had on the Dorna coverage, the grid this week, where they were like, Jack Appleyard goes down and says, Frankie, how are you gonna go today? How things feel? How's the bike? And he does I will I will use my fast machine and try to keep it clean. And then they're like, okay, thanks. Like how
that was some version of an Italian take on AC/DC lyrics. I'm not sure, but that's what I thought at the time.
Right. But I'm like, so how is that guy going to adapt to like getting a radio message when it's like he thinks differently?
Well, let's look at last weekend. Okay, so Marc Marquez is ahead. His big championship rival is his brother. So let's say you get on the radio and you say Alex Marquez has fallen. So that's useful information. Your title rival is out. If you just tell him your title rival is out, he'll wonder which one it is. Is it my teammate or is it my brother? So if you tell him it's his brother, you kind of have to tell him that he got up, right?
Yes.
And now how much is he thinking about everything other than what's like there's a good argument to be made while riding a motorcycle at the absolute limit that you don't want to feed too many things in. Now, it's funny you mentioned this because Ben Young, who seems to have a wide bandwidth of being able to absorb information while he's riding, I'm going to ask him, what would you think in that situation? Do you want to know, is it better to just ride your own race and you notice that the pit board isn't showing your brother's name anymore? So he's had some kind of problem. He's fading back or he's fallen. But, right away, there's an example of how what's the best thing for the rider is very difficult to know. know. And we see this particularly in F1, where when Lewis Hamilton switches teams and has a different crew chief, and they don't have the shorthand to discuss their problems and how much I want to be bothered and how much I want your opinion on decisions I'm having to make. And I think you touch on Maverick Vinales, that he has very limited bandwidth. He's always been very clear about that. He just wants the bike to feel right, then he'll do what he can do. So more distractions for him just looks like a disaster looking for a place to happen.
Yeah, totally. And it also makes me think, when you mentioned the Alex thing, we got that raw reaction of Mark in the celebrations at the end, talking to his dad, and you could see his dad going, yeah, like he banged the front brake, and then all of a sudden it was like bang, and you see Mark wince and go, oh man, that's what happened, right? It's like, if we start going down this road of the communication, anyways, we've gone down a rabbit hole as I knew we would, but I wanted
so let's circle back though. What's it like? Have you ever had the experience of a coach talking to you in the middle of a game?
So I have had at various points like walkie-talkies essentially on the sideline where we could communicate up to the booth with the coordinator, but also when I was in Calgary for training camp with the Stampeders in 2013, which was my only time like being in a professional football training camp, as a quarterback, we had the speaker in the helmet. I was mind blown by it because I've watched football my whole life, and the actual, like how it gets in there, it's just a massive speaker right next to your ear. And it's like, so one of your ears is just completely getting blasted, and the other one has nothing. It's not like your smooth Bluetooth surround sound, balanced audio. It's
So it's
like,
not a Senna in your shoey.
no, it's like it's somebody just screaming at a terrible wattage into your right ear, and like I could hear it with the play call happening. I'm standing next to Dave Dickinson, that at that time the offensive coordinator, now the head coach in Calgary, and he's calling the play in to Bo Levi Mitchell in training camp in 13, and I can hear both ends of it because I could hear Bo, because the speaker was cranked up so much, even though it was training camp, because he's got to get used to it for when there's crowd noise. So anyways, I found it to be incredibly distracting. For me, I'm like, just signal me in the play call that's on my band and we'll go from there. But it's a huge part of sport, and as technology evolves in sport, you're always going to try to have people pushing the envelope, and it seems like where MotoGP and motorcycle racing in general is going.
In football, did it speed things up?
Yes, but it just to what you spoke about, like adding layers of complication. There's been times where I've been listening to the broadcast, or I've been field level for games I'm not doing, where I can hear a coach saying to the quarterback right up into, because they don't cut the audio with like 10 seconds left on the play clock. You can talk in their ear right up to the snap. And so sometimes they'll break the huddle and you'll hear a coach go, hey, it looks like it's 2-man. There's a shell over the top, or hey, look into the boundary. Let's play the boundary here. Play the boundary. So they're actually coaching them in real time, cramming as much as they possibly can.
So in bike racing, in theory, this would be Miller came in and these are the tires on the bike he switched to, right? You could actually get some reconnaissance. Now, given that's probably going to the leader and whatever's happening is behind you, whether or not that's going to improve things much, impossible to know. But it is interesting. You're talking about real-time information as you're going to make your decision.
Totally. All right, let's dive into all things Bridgestone CSBK off to Edmonton, Rad Torque Race. It's a triple. Here's my question for you, more than anything else that's on my mind right now, is will the championships, I mean, obviously will be decided at Mosport in the fourth and final round of this season, but will they be more decided at Mosport or in this triple? Because it feels like this is the pendulum. And again, this is, hindsight 2020. When we're going into Mosport, we'll be able to say, oh man, now it's really up for grabs. But this is going to have a massive, massive impact on all of these championships this season.
Yeah, this is the hinge round. This is the crucial round, and probably a couple of championships we will look back on as being completely decided. What is interesting, you and I have talked about this before, and we talked about it while we were working on the Shubenacadie coverage from round 2, is the reality that in both cases, GP Bikes Pro Superbike and Super Sport, our middleweight class, the points tightened up a lot. So it's not a decisive situation. There's nobody sitting in a dominant position. Ben Young is leading Superbike with no wins. Collins is leading Super Sport with 3 wins, but points-wise, they're in very similar situations. So if either of them stumble, and this is the thing that everyone's thinking about right now, are the unknowns and the uncontrollables. Because if you particularly have a mechanical problem, that's a big issue. If you have a mechanical problem Saturday, and it affects your 2 Sunday races, like let's say you tumble it through one of the chicanes and the bike's hard to fix, it's going to be very problematic putting your bike back together. And if the guy in the tent beside you has a BMW, you may be making good friends with him to try and borrow the parts you need to keep going, because we're in a situation where the Superbike guys have 2 races on Sunday, and there's going to be somebody who doesn't get through the third race on Sunday with enough bike under him to do a good job.
It's a good point I hadn't really thought of when we had this discussion, and kind of the lead up to it, as you say, is the idea that in terms of constructors, it's great to have a depth of field of constructors for people that might be able to help you out, because there's going to be unquestionably some sort of desperation that pops up because there is so much racing happening in such a short period of time there for the Superbike guys. So, but the championship in general.
Let's briefly mention spare bikes, right? Because Ben Young has 2 Hondas, but one of them has more or less been left in a situation electronically where it's probably at best a rain bike, whereas Guerin, I believe, has 2 BMWs that are both capable of winning. That's my take with Dumas too. He made a mess of one of them Saturday morning, but that's fixed now. I know Scott Miller's been going at it full tilt. Believe it or not, one of the international couriers has had a strike, which has prevented parts from coming from Germany for Miller's BMW program. So Miller's been rebuilding that bike out of bits and pieces, which is what he spent all last year doing with the Ducati. So it's very important in Scott Miller's current situation with the economy lube and tire BMW that he harvest every broken part. Every little smashed up piece needs to be found, so perhaps it could be used to reconstruct.
It's like Fabio Quartararo trying to bring back the ride height. What was that? What it was? The ride height device, I guess, or something. It was something electronic in nature that he crashed and then picked it up and carried it back to the box. I'm like, he's making $12 million a year and he's still carrying it back to the box. What a good guy. Eh?
Well, he also knows how important it is, right?
Yes.
And you don't forget those things, particularly when he had to drop out at Silverstone on what appeared to be a convincing lead. And the rules about the ride height stuff are very specific, and they're only electronic to a point, and then they're restricted by rules. So there is a mechanical element, I believe, particularly with the front device, more so than the rear device. And it was the front device that acted up for him, and I still don't really understand what happened, but it activated. I don't know how he managed to do it in the middle of a race, because if you watch them going to the grid, you can tell everybody's very nervous that they've locked down the fork. And then, of course, you see the side shot of these ridiculous looking MotoGP bikes, which now are some kind of NHRA pro stock, I don't know what. They don't look like MotoGP bikes.
Yeah, they are drag racing, that's for sure. Shout out to Cam Bickle, by the way, on doing the math. I enjoyed reading the preview for the CSBK.ca preview here of Superbike, saying it's a whopping 4,770 kilometers from the last time that we saw the feature class in Nova Scotia. So he punched that in because he was being all nerdy and stuff and looking into the analytics and the numbers. But we wouldn't put that past Bickle to ever do that, would we? But he mentions in this article that it's hardly a 2-horse race between Alex Dumas and Ben Young. Jordan Zoke just a further 9 points back, and Sammy Guerin, after his great performance at Atlantic Motorsport Park, mere 18 points will cover the entire top 4 at the midway point of the season. What does your gut tell you will be the defining story coming out of Edmonton is the last thing I'll ask you here on Superbike.
I think the speculation right now is Collins, because obviously he's trying to win a championship. He's in good shape. He's not dominating because of his fall at Shubenacadie on a wet track. But last year on a bike that theoretically wouldn't have been competitive, he was very competitive in Superbike, but he didn't have a concern in another class. So I don't know what Collins could do in Superbike. My concern is he won't try because he doesn't want to risk his bike. He just has the one bike, right? Unless something's happened there. And of course, he has a new sponsor who's local. And so there might be some other things cooking there. But having said that, he's trying to win a championship super sport, the middleweight class on a Suzuki. I hope he has enough bike left that maybe he can ride the last Superbike race when he won't have any super sport races left after that. Because if Collins rode all those Superbike races, he would be a top 4 or 5 guy. And I'm sure some of the front runners are frightened about what he might be capable of because of what we saw last year and his comfort level at that track. And I think one of the first things we're going to do is be analyzing his lap times in Supersport to see where that will put him in Superbike. I'm suspicious that Degama Blanchette's going to be the story, partly because his bike is local, which means in theory they could go fix it. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that that's a very cynical view of what could go wrong, but if everybody's struggling, to have enough bike under them, being local to service and parts and all that kind of stuff. And also the fact that he's fifth in the points and coming to his home track, at Shuby, he had kind of a lonely run, which is what you kind of expect in that situation. The field is deep, but people don't go out when it's wet and people have problems and all that kind of stuff. And of course, Collins didn't ride the second Superbike race because of issues with his bike.
It would be amazing to see Torin actually dip his toes in and do the Superbike as much as he possibly can, but we'll find out what happens there. Octagon Energy Services, by the way, I want to give them a shout out. They are the new title sponsor for Torin Collins Supersport campaign at round 3 at Rad Torque Raceway, which, by the way, Torin, did you get a chance to watch Supersport Race 2 from the Ridge? Because I watched that the Sunday race on Canada Day, and like he got a ton of airtime with good reason because Ryota Ojiwara, who is the Asia Talent Cup points leader, I guess, that didn't have anything going on, so he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll just hop over and go to Washington State and hop on the bike." But
relatively closer to Asia though than we are,
right,
for instance.
yeah, exactly. But it's like, hey, so he hops on this like Vesra Racing bike, and Horn and him lock horns all race. And up at the front, it was pretty boring. Like it was Matthew Skoltz was out in front and PJ Jacobson and whatever. And it was amazing because everything that we saw at Shuby, like whether it be, dive bombing down the inside of Jordan's Oak multiple times, or he's doing the same thing to Ojiwara in this Super Sport MotoAmerica race. So if anybody has a chance to go back and watch, and obviously we understand what he's about, but it's just relentless. And like seeing him do it to the points leader in the Asian Cup, I'm like, man, it's amazing to see
Also,
cross-pollination of that.
so Torin actually beat him, and their fastest laps were 1/100th apart. And that tells you how those guys were going at it. Now, my hope, because I don't feel Collins is getting the attention he has deserved, maybe this puts him back into the conversation that some people pay attention, because, of course, Talent Cup means a lot in Europe. And I would think that there's a lot of sort of midfield Spanish development riders, Italian too, who are looking at this and go, that guy left 2 years ago and now he's able to run up, with a guy with real pedigree.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems with Collins is here, we don't have any doubt about what he's capable of, right? Because we sort of have this idea, Ben Young is at a certain level. If you're at Ben Young's level, then, you're pretty darn good. And so, I hope this gets Colin somewhere. He's
Totally.
young enough; he could get somewhere.
And he's had a couple of mishaps here and there, which is going to happen throughout the season. Obviously, I think he had the crash at Barber in one of the races when it was really, really wet. But he is 10th in the Motivation Supersport Championship in Moto America. I'm like, that's pretty damn good, man. You look at the names that are up ahead of him. It's PJ Jacobson, Matthew Skoltz, Blake Davis, Tyler Scott, Jake Lewis, Cam Peterson on the Economy Lube and tire, which, by the way, somebody tell Greg White it's not Economy Lube plus tire. It's really bothering me on the broadcast. I'm sorry. It's digging in.
Well, it's okay. I work with some people behind the scenes who call it that too, because it actually, if you read the graphic, it's a plus sign.
I know. He did it over the speakers.
By the way, let's also mention, theoretically, Tyler Scott is the Suzuki guy to beat. And that was the next person in front of Collins. So Collins was in the middle of the 3 top GSXRs. So, if you go apples to apples and don't take into account things such as the Yamaha triples, he's still getting there. But the problem is he believes he should be 3rd or 4th now.
Yeah.
And he just hasn't had that breakthrough. And we always talk about these rising stars and how they're looking for that result that kind of forces everyone to pay attention.
Yeah, and I was going to say that actually, I'm glad you brought this up in terms of the triples because I believe his Altus Motorsports teammate Jake Lewis has the R9, and he was beating Jake Lewis on the R9 in that Supersport race number 2. I believe he did finish ahead of him, if I'm looking at the standings correctly here as well. Yeah, I think he was one spot up.
Lewis was 9th, so Lewis was not that far behind. He was about 4 seconds behind that very good and entertaining battle for 7th.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyways, I mentioned that obviously the Canadian Superbike podcast, but it's like that was a great context after seeing what Torin did at Atlantic Motorsport Park and then getting ready to see him go in here to Edmonton where he could really shake things up in Superbike. But obviously Supersport has been dominant so far this season when he has been able to cross the line at the end and seeing what he did this past weekend out there at the Ridge as well. It's like he's going to come in hot going into Edmonton.
Yeah, I mean, it's he's ready to race. Whether or not he'll have anyone to race is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Tremblay wasn't in good shape a year ago when we were in Edmonton. Vieira looked really good and should have won a race. Lang has shown a lot of pace there. I mean, if you're looking for a surprise step forward, Lang, I think, would be the first place to look.
Yeah, so this, I guess, is the question is who can bring the fight to Torin in Supersport at this point, right? Because like Tremblay obviously would like to get up there. We're still trying to get a little bit more consistency, perhaps, out of Elliot Vieira. Last year, he had a very disappointing and frustrating round out there in Edmonton with a couple of DNFs, but John Lang was pretty dominant last year in that first race, and then the second one the pace kind of fell off. Mav Steer last year looked really, really good, and I believe in the second race he ended up finishing second or third off the top of my head, but he made a great pass.
Well, that Edmonton was the big weekend for Sear.
Yeah.
But he is not in the series at the moment, so
Yep.
I don't expect him to be a factor. And of course, the person who we should mention, probably higher up than we have, is Andrew Van Winkle.
Yes. Yeah.
He's still on a GSXR 600, not a 750, but he was impressive in Nova Scotia, and he's climbed back into the discussion in terms of points. He's second overall. Now it's interesting. Collins and Van Winkle are good friends. We don't know what's going to happen with Phil de Gama Blanchette, because there was some talk that they might park the Ducati and not ride in that class anymore. I hope that's not the case, but nonetheless, the three amigos, as they are sometimes referred to, we're waiting for those three to start hammering on each other, because all of them seem overly ambitious in the most positive way you can be overly ambitious.
Right, and I feel bad for not mentioning Andrew Van Winkle earlier because his original victory in Supersport came last year at this track, correct? So, yeah, you shouldn't.
On Sunday we have extra races.
Exactly. Yeah, it should be very, very strong. But it is a good question because when you talk to Andrew or you see his dad, it's like smiling, happy go lucky, but it's like what happens when Torin bangs his way down the inside or they touch going through the crazy banked wall, the Nürburgring of Rad Torque. Like it's I'm excited to see what that battle looks like. But I guess the challenge for everybody is if Torin qualifies up front, has a great lap time, and Torin flies away, how do you catch Torin to create an issue? Because unless Torin has oil slipping off onto his left boot, and all of a sudden he's riding on the very edge of the tire and feels like he's going to high side, how do you possibly catch him and then force the issue and try to see what his pace actually is?
Well, I guess that's an Andrew Van Winkle question,
Right.
because it's a psych job, but somebody like Van Winkle in a very short period of time has ridden with all the top guys, especially with Tremblay. But if it's Tremblay, he has the discipline to go after Collins. The irony of it is that Collins has made it clear that method of riding that Tremblay has adopted, that we all preach at racing schools and all that kind of stuff, that he doesn't respect it. And I think he referred to it in our TSN interview as bullshit, right?
Yeah.
The smooth is fast and all that kind of stuff. He just doesn't believe in it. So all of us old guys should be cheering for Tremblay to go and prove that being a consistent, sympathetic to your machine kind of guy can make a difference.
So that is Superbike and Super Sport. We will see what happens there. Also, Alex Michel, I should mention him as well. He had a very solid round number 2, and we'll see what he can do here coming up in round 3. But and then in some of the support classes as well, right from the very beginning at Shannonville, I think what jumped out to me was Cole Alexander and just how smooth he looked. Like he's one of the true up and coming talents that I think is kind of like next in line to take that step and perhaps jump in and get into the fray with the three amigos, as you call them. But there's plenty of stuff up for grabs here in the sport categories because Cole Alexander's going west for the first time in his career with leads in both the AIM Insurance Amateur Superbike class and the EBC Brakes Amateur Supersport category. So, I mean, he's got an opportunity to cement himself once again very, very solidly in kind of the future plans of Bridgestone CSBK.
Well, Alexander is a person who illustrates the problem with the remote triple header that you're far from home. He's in a good situation, but because he's in a good situation and in 2 classes and in a bike that's more suited to 1 class because it's not an open class motorcycle, he really needs to think structurally about the points, right? His whole weekend has to be framed by where he is in the standings and getting to Canadian Tire Motorsport Park at the start of August in a situation to clinch. Because if he gets wrapped up racing the locals or has a crash Thursday when he's learning the track, and we've seen this happen, years and years ago, Jody Christie went out there, crashed right away, hurt his hand, and really hurt his whole effort and set up Jordan Zoke to take the championship. So it's hard, and to expect a young guy to make a lot of those kind of percentage decisions the easiest thing is to play it straight, play it conservative, not take any risks. And he, as much as the most of the pro guys aren't in a position to manage it that way, and Ben Young is leading but hasn't won a race,
Yeah.
right? And Jordan Zoke is not that far behind. And, I mean, what would be fascinating, just to switch back to pro for a second,
Yep.
imagine if Jordan Zoke wins two of those races and we're going to Canadian Tire Motorsport Park and he's now slightly leading in the point standings.
Yeah, that would be wild. I mean, there's a ton of potential outcomes here, but yeah, it's a great point about Cole Alexander and trying to frame his weekend correctly, right? Because Zion Laflamme's been extremely quick as well, so they've had a great rivalry this season, and we'll see that continue. Different situation in the Importations Thibaut Twins Cup class. JP Taché is undefeated and can become the first national champion of 2025 this coming weekend out there in Edmonton. So we will see whether or not that happens. But the track itself, Colin, let's just talk about that before we get out of here. Edmonton, Rad Torque, the challenges, the nuances of it. I mean, we can talk about, who it favors, different riding styles, all that kind of stuff. But again, I haven't seen nearly as many tracks as you have. You've seen hundreds of them throughout your life. I just thought this place was super interesting last year compared to some of the places that I'd seen a bunch of, which was Grand Bend and Shannonville. And I mean, Mosport obviously is Mosport. It's kind of untouchable. It's an unbelievable place. But Rad Torque, it just kind of felt like, to me, being out there the first time, that somebody pieced together a bunch of different color Legos. And it was like, we're going to have like some of the red here and a little bit of blue over there and then some, yellow over here. And it's got a whole bunch of different stuff in these different sections.
Well, the funny thing is, in some ways, it reminds me the most of Race City, the now long gone track just outside of Calgary. In that it has a stop and go sections, which are mostly what you see from the pit and paddock, and then kind of out yonder, a fast flowing section, which is much more fun and interesting. But arguably, that nearer stop and go type section is where the Collins of the world thrive, because that is definitely what he likes. And he's clear that that's where he does well. And his performance in the multiple chicanes. And I remember talking to a couple of the tuners, and that, trail braking to set your way up into a series of bends. Collins just has a riding style where he can make a lot of time on the entrance. And, he's greedy on his entries. And, we thought that somebody like Trevor Daley was kind of the king of that, but Collins definitely established that he has a riding style that seems to specifically suit that track. Now, we had a test day right after Edmonton last year and went to Rocky Mountain, and Torin was the fastest there too. So it's not as if, and we've seen he can ride fast everywhere. I mean, his only remaining challenge this year is CTMP, and that's mostly because last year he didn't like it that much. Of course, he mostly rode in the rain, so he didn't really have a good crack at it. But I don't think anybody's worried that Collins is going to be struggling for pace. But of course, hardly anyone else in the series rides like Collins. And the other amigos are probably most likely to go after him and ride in that manner because they think that that's the solution to getting a lap time. Now, having said that, Ben Young doesn't ride that way. And Ben Young has, with limited time at that track, done very well. On Saturday, he was the dominant player last year. On Sunday, he was in some issues with tires, which wasn't so much the tire, but a little bit the setup. Had a couple of moments and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. I think we saw at Shubenacadie that Ben Young is willing to take some chances on the Honda. He was riding pretty hard. So we'll see how that plays out. And you're back circling around again. Geraint had a terrible time last year at Edmonton, or at least a disappointing and frustrating time. And now he's the hot guy in the series, right? So imagine if Geraint can translate that. But
yeah, we'll see if he can carry the momentum from Atlantic Motorsport Park over. But yeah, just hearing you mention that, and this is one of those funny things when you're doing this podcast, right? And I find this listening to other podcasts, whether it be MotoGP World Superbike too. It's like sometimes there's so many interesting stories and different personalities and ways to discuss these things that you almost forget some of the major. And it's like Alex Dumas, just kind of quietly, it feels like at this point, it's like, he's right there up at the top of the championship. And talking about this just reminded me, he made his return last year, right? When he was on the Ducati, he came in last year and it was in Edmonton. We had that tremendous sit down with him. People should go to the CSBK YouTube page if you have the opportunity and listen to Colin pick the brain of Alex Dumas from the track on Saturday night about trying to adapt to that bike. Not applicable to this bike, obviously, because now he's on the BMW, but to see him come in last year and do what he did going into this weekend, it's like that economy lube and tire effort, I think, is going to be very, very difficult to beat. But I love just the dynamic of Ben on the Honda trying to do it, Torin throwing himself in everybody's way, Sam being hot on the BMW after having a disaster of a first round, Jordan just wanting to constantly climb his way up onto the podium. And then you go further and further back, and it's like there are a couple of names there that might be able to jump their way into the fray, but we shall see how it all turns out. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think it's Dumas is slightly overlooked just at the moment because he wasn't happy on Sunday at Shubenacadie in the dry. And, he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't his normal self. And he certainly wasn't quite what he had been at Shannonville a few weeks earlier. So, my question is, how much does Dumas like the track at Edmonton? Because given he'd never ridden the Ducati before, he was very impressive there last year. And, if we came out of there and Dumas had 3 more wins, that would not be a complete surprise. But people thought Young would break through at Shuby. It didn't happen. There's only 5 more Superbike races left
Yeah,
until Christmas.
it's crazy. I was watching the Canada Day parade, and there was in Caledonia where I live now yesterday, and there was a float that went past that said only 24 more sleeps until corn is available at the corner stand. I was like, man, you do not get a float like that. It's like they paid money to have a float in this thing just to let people know how many more sleeps until the corn's available. So yeah, the harvest is coming. That means we're getting late in the Superbike season. So, all right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you, Colin. As always, fun conversation, and didn't anticipate us going down that rabbit hole on all things communication, but it's interesting. So anyways, hopefully people will enjoy that. Have a good time out in Edmonton, and I will catch up with you in the voiceover studio to talk all things Rad Torque. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks for listening.